Picture this. You're sitting at your family's Christmas dinner table, wearing a thrift store sweater because you spent your last good paycheck keeping your dream alive, when your aunt looks directly at you and asks in front of everyone, are you going to stop this nonsense and get a real job? Your stomach drops, your cheeks burn. 23 family members are staring at you, some with pity, others with that uncomfortable silence that says they agree with her. But here's the thing about rock-bottom moments. Sometimes they happen right before your biggest breakthrough. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor. And sometimes, just sometimes, vindication comes knocking at your door with champagne and a 7-figure contract while your family is still chewing on their words of doubt. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how I went from being the family disappointment to landing the biggest deal of my career, all in the span of one Christmas dinner that I'll never, ever forget. The Richardson family Christmas dinner happens every year on December 23rd at my grandmother's house in Scottsdale. You know those pristine Arizona neighborhoods where every house looks like it belongs in a home magazine? That's where Grandma Rose lives. Perfect desert landscaping, spotless white shutters, and a dining room table that seats 24 people comfortably. Growing up, I thought these dinners were magical. The whole extended family gathered together, everyone dressed in their holiday best, sharing stories and laughter over Grandma's famous prime rib and homemade dinner rolls. But as I got older, I started to notice something that made my stomach twist every December. These weren't just family dinners. They were performance reviews disguised as holiday gatherings. Everyone had their moment to shine, their chance to update the family on their latest achievements, promotions, and life milestones. My cousin Ryan would talk about his construction company's latest commercial project. Aunt Linda would show photos from her boutique's successful holiday season. Uncle Mike would brag about his restaurant's 5-star reviews and celebrity customers. And then there was me, Sarah Richardson, age 28, the family question mark. The one who'd thrown away a perfectly good corporate communications job to chase what they all considered an impossible dream. The one who drove a dented Honda Civic to a gathering full of BMWs and Mercedes. The one who shopped at thrift stores while my sister Jessica wore designer everything. This particular Christmas, I almost didn't come. I'd been working 18-hour days for the past month, trying to prepare a massive pitch presentation for Monday morning while juggling my existing clients' holiday campaigns. My business partner Maria and I had been living on coffee and determination, putting together what we hoped would be the proposal that changed everything. But Sunday night, staring at my laptop screen with bloodshot eyes, I realized I needed a break. I needed to see family, even if it meant facing the usual questions about when I was going to get serious about my career. So there I sat, at the far end of the table between my teenage cousin Emma and great-aunt Ruth, wearing a burgundy sweater I'd found at Goodwill for $12. Not because I loved thrift shopping, but because every extra dollar I made went straight back into Richardson Digital Marketing Solutions, the social media consultancy I'd started 2 years earlier in my studio apartment. The evening started, like it always did. Grandma Rose stood up, tapped her wine glass with a fork, and asked everyone to share their highlights from the year. One by one, my relatives painted pictures of success, stability, and growth. Jessica, my older sister by 3 years, practically glowed as she talked about her promotion to senior marketing director at Pinnacle Financial. She'd just bought a 4-bedroom house in Paradise Valley with her husband Brad, and they were planning a 2-week European vacation for their 5th anniversary. "It's been an incredible year for growth," Jessica said, her voice confident and clear. "We've expanded our client portfolio by 40%. And I'm leading a team of 12 marketing professionals now. The company is sending me to the leadership conference in New York next month." The table erupted in congratulations and questions. Dad beamed with pride. Mom immediately started asking about the house, the neighborhood, whether they were thinking about kids soon. It was Jessica's moment, and she deserved it. She'd worked hard, made smart choices, followed a traditional path that everyone understood and respected. When the spotlight turned to me, the energy shifted. I could feel it immediately. That subtle change in attention, like everyone was bracing themselves for disappointment. Aunt Linda leaned forward with that smile adults give children when they're about to ask about something they don't really want to hear about. "And Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of false sweetness that makes your skin crawl. "How's your little social media business going? Still posting pictures on Instagram for people?" I felt my face flush hot, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "Actually, it's been a really good year. I've grown from 3 clients to 15, and I hired my first full-time employee last month. We're working with restaurants, fitness studios, local retailers, helping them build their digital presence and increase their revenue through targeted social media strategies." I watched their faces as I spoke. Some nodded politely, but I could see the skepticism in their eyes. Uncle Mike actually chuckled, and shook his head. "Sarah, sweetheart, that's adorable. But when are you going to think about your future? You can't build a retirement plan on Facebook posts. Maybe it's time to consider going back to corporate work? I'm sure with your communications background, you could find something stable." The word stable hit me like a slap. Stable, the family code word for real job versus whatever it was they thought I was doing with my life. "What I'm doing is building something," I said, trying to keep the defensiveness out of my voice. "My clients are seeing real results. We've helped restaurants increase their revenue by 30%, fitness studios double their membership, retail stores expand their customer base beyond their physical location." Dad jumped in then, and I could see that look on his face, the one he got when he was about to deliver what he thought was practical wisdom. "Sarah, nobody's saying what you're doing isn't nice. But Jessica has benefits, a 401k, job security. What happens if this social media trend passes? What's your backup plan?" The table went quiet. 23 pairs of eyes staring at me while I sat there with my thrift store sweater and my secondhand confidence, trying to explain why I'd chosen uncertainty over security, why I'd chosen dreams over guarantees. That's when Aunt Linda delivered the final blow. She'd had 3 glasses of wine by then, and her filter was completely gone. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and frustration, like she was tired of watching me fail to meet expectations. "Sarah, honey," she said, her voice carrying across the entire table. "When are you going to stop pretending and get a real job like your sister?" The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the soft hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen, the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Every person at that table was looking at me, waiting for my response, and I felt like I was 8 years old again, being scolded for coloring outside the lines. My hands went numb where they gripped my napkin. My throat felt tight, like I was trying to swallow around a golf ball. The worst part wasn't the embarrassment, though. That was crushing. The worst part was the tiny voice in my head that whispered, "Maybe she's right." After 2 years of 16-hour days, rejected proposals, and a bank account that fluctuated between hope and desperation, that voice had been getting louder every day. I opened my mouth to respond, to defend myself, to explain once again why what I was doing mattered. But before I could say a word, the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the tension like a knife, and everyone's attention shifted toward the front of the house. Grandma Rose started to get up, but I was already pushing back my chair. "I'll get it," I said, grateful for any excuse to escape the table and that horrible, suffocating silence. I walked through the living room on shaking legs, past the perfectly arranged Christmas tree with its color-coordinated ornaments, past the family photos on the mantle that chronicled years of achievements and milestones. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the front door handle, and I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself before facing whoever was on the other side. When I opened the door, Maria Santos stood there holding a bottle of champagne in one hand and a manila folder in the other. Her usually perfect hair was windblown, and she was practically vibrating with excitement. Maria was my business partner, the restaurant owner who'd joined forces with me 8 months earlier to create Santos and Richardson Marketing Consultancy. She was supposed to be in Phoenix with her own family, celebrating Christmas Eve with her parents and siblings. Maria? What are you doing here? Is everything okay? She looked past me toward the dining room, where I could hear the murmur of confused voices and chair legs scraping against hardwood floors. 23 family members were probably craning their necks to see who had interrupted Christmas dinner. "I'm so sorry to show up like this," Maria said, but her grin was so wide I thought her face might split in half. "I know I should have called first, but I couldn't wait until Monday. I had to tell you in person." "Tell me what?" She held up the folder, and I could see her hands were shaking with excitement. "We got it, Sarah. Microsoft said yes. They want to hire Santos and Richardson as their exclusive small business marketing consultants for the entire Southwest region. It's a 3-year contract worth $2 million. I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "What did you just say?" "Microsoft. $1.2 million. Sarah, we did it. We actually did it." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Microsoft had been our white whale, the dream client we'd been pursuing for 6 months. They were launching a new initiative to help small businesses leverage technology for growth, and they needed a marketing firm that understood both digital strategy and the unique challenges faced by local entrepreneurs. Maria and I had submitted our proposal 3 weeks ago, but we'd been competing against firms 10 times our size, companies with decades of corporate experience and client lists that read like the Fortune 500. "Are you serious right now?" I asked, and my voice came out as barely a whisper. "Dead serious. They called an hour ago. The program director said our proposal was exactly what they were looking for. Authentic, innovative, and backed by real results with real small businesses. They want us to start January 15th. I looked back toward the dining room, where I could hear Aunt Linda's voice asking loudly, "Sarah, who is it? We're waiting on dessert." Maria followed my gaze and raised an eyebrow. "Should I come back later?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I don't want to interrupt family time. For a moment, I considered it. I could send Maria away, sit back down at that table, endure the rest of dinner with Aunt Linda's words still ringing in my ears. I could wait until tomorrow to share this news, to process what it meant, to figure out how to respond to the family members who'd just finished explaining why my career was a dead end. But then something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the champagne bottle in Maria's hand, or the official Microsoft letterhead I could see peeking out of the folder, or just the sheer cosmic irony of the timing. Whatever it was, I found myself smiling for the first time all evening. "Actually," I said, opening the door wider, "I think your timing is perfect. Come meet my family." As we walked back toward the dining room, I could feel my heartbeat slowing. Down, my breathing getting deeper. The nervous energy that had been churning in my stomach all evening was transforming into something else entirely. Not anger, not vindication, but a quiet confidence that felt solid and unshakable. The conversation stopped the moment we entered the dining room. 23 faces turned toward us, curious and slightly confused. Maria looked elegant and professional even in her casual Christmas Eve clothes, and she carried herself with the kind of confidence that comes from building something successful from the ground up. "Everyone," I said, and my voice came out stronger than I expected. "I'd like you to meet Maria Santos, my business partner." Grandma Rose immediately stood up, ever the gracious hostess. "Of course, dear. Please join us. Can I get you a plate?" "Thank you so much, Mrs. Richardson, but I can't stay long. I just had some news that couldn't wait until Monday." Maria looked at me and smiled, and I nodded for her to continue. Sarah and I just found out that Microsoft has accepted our proposal to become their exclusive small business marketing consultants for the Southwest region. It's a 3-year contract that will allow us to help thousands of small businesses across Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, and Colorado leverage technology to grow their companies. The silence that followed was different from the one that had greeted Aunt Linda's cutting question. This was the silence of shock, of minds trying to process information that didn't fit their preconceived notions. Uncle Mike was the first to find his voice. Microsoft? The Microsoft? Yes, sir, Maria replied. The contract is worth $2 million over 3 years, and it positions Santos and Richardson as one of the premier small business marketing consultancies in the region. I watched the faces around that table transform in real time. Dad's eyes went wide. Mom's hand flew to her chest. Jessica looked genuinely stunned, but I could see pride starting to creep into her expression. Even Aunt Linda seemed speechless, her wine glass frozen halfway to her lips. Sarah, Dad said slowly, you never mentioned you were working with Microsoft. We've been in negotiations for 6 months, I replied, but we didn't want to say anything until it was official. The competition was intense. We were up against some of the biggest marketing firms in the country. Cousin Ryan leaned forward, suddenly interested. What exactly will you be doing for them? Maria and I spent the next 20 minutes explaining the program, the scope of our work, and what it meant for small businesses across the Southwest. I watched my family's perception of me shift with every detail we shared. Questions that had felt like interrogations an hour earlier now sounded like genuine curiosity about my expertise. When Maria finally left, with promises to return soon for a proper family dinner, the energy around the table had completely changed. People who'd been avoiding eye contact with me earlier were now asking follow-up questions about my business, my plans for growth, my thoughts on digital marketing trends. But the most meaningful moment came when Aunt Linda approached me as we were clearing dessert plates. She touched my arm gently, and when I looked at her, I saw something I'd never seen before: respect. Sarah, she said quietly, I owe you an apology. I had no idea how successful you'd become. I was wrong to question your choices. I could have savored that moment, could have made her squirm a little longer, could have pointed out all the times she'd dismissed my dreams as childish fantasies. But looking at her face, seeing the genuine regret there, I realized that holding on to resentment would only diminish the joy of this moment. Thank you for saying that, I replied. It means a lot. As I drove home that night, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this point. 2 years of doubt, struggle, and determination. 2 years of choosing my dreams over other people's comfort, of betting on myself when everyone else saw only risk. 2 years of building something meaningful while the people I loved most questioned whether it was worth the effort. The Microsoft contract was incredible, life-changing, validating in ways I couldn't have imagined. But the real victory wasn't the money or the prestige or even the look of shock on Aunt Linda's face when Maria walked through that door. The real victory was the moment I realized I no longer needed their approval to feel successful. I'd found my own definition of worth, my own measurement of achievement, my own path to fulfillment. If you've ever sat at a table where your dreams were dismissed as hobbies, where your potential was measured against someone else's definition of success, I want you to hear this. Their doubt is not your reality. Their limitations are not your boundaries. Their fear of your failure says more about them than it does about you. The world needs dreamers who are brave enough to color outside the lines, to choose uncertainty over security, to build something meaningful rather than settle for something safe. You don't need permission to chase your vision. You don't need approval to create something beautiful. You just need the courage to keep going when everyone else thinks you should quit. So that's my story, from family disappointment to Microsoft partner. all in the span of one Christmas dinner I'll never forget. If this resonates with you, drop a comment below and tell me about the dream they called impossible. Because I see you. Your vision matters, and your moment of vindication is coming. Like and subscribe if this inspired you to choose your dreams over their doubts. And remember, sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to give up on yourself. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a $2 million contract to celebrate. The moment Aunt Linda's words hit the air, something inside me fractured. Not broke completely, but cracked in a way that let all the doubt I'd been fighting seep in like water through stone. My hands, which had been steady enough to hold a fork, moments before, began trembling so violently I had to place them flat on the table to hide it. The burgundy sweater that had felt comfortable when I put it on suddenly felt like it was strangling me. The fabric too tight across my chest as my breathing became shallow and quick. 23 pairs of eyes were trained on me, and I could feel the weight of their collective judgment pressing down like a physical force. Some faces showed pity, the kind you reserve for stray dogs or broken toys. Others displayed that particular brand of secondhand embarrassment people feel when someone they know is making a scene, even though I hadn't said a word. A few relatives looked genuinely uncomfortable, shifting in their chairs and studying their dessert plates like they contained the secrets of the universe. But it was the faces that showed agreement that cut the deepest. Uncle Mike nodding slightly, as if Aunt Linda had simply voiced what everyone had been thinking. Cousin Ryan's girlfriend, whispering something to him behind her hand. Great aunt. Ruth pursing her lips in that way that said she'd been waiting for someone to finally address the elephant in the room. The worst part wasn't even the humiliation, though that burned through me like acid. The worst part was the voice in my head that started whispering the moment the words left Aunt Linda's mouth. The voice that said maybe she was right. Maybe I had been pretending. Maybe this whole entrepreneurial journey was just an elaborate form of denial. A way to avoid admitting that I wasn't cut out for the kind of success the rest of my family achieved so effortlessly. I thought about my bank account, which had exactly $347 in it after paying my portion of the office rent Maria and I shared. I thought about the ramen noodles I'd eaten for lunch 3 days in a row because I'd spent my grocery budget on new business cards. I thought about the presentation I'd been working on for 18 hours a day, the one that could change everything or confirm everyone's worst suspicions about my chosen career path. My face felt like it was on fire, the heat spreading from my cheeks down my neck and across my chest. I could feel sweat starting to form along my hairline, despite the fact that Grandma Rose kept her house at a crisp 68 degrees year-round. My mouth went completely dry, like I'd been eating cotton balls, and when I tried to swallow, nothing happened. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. I opened my mouth to respond, to defend myself, to explain once again why what I was doing mattered, and why it was working, and why they should believe in me the way I was learning to believe in myself. But no sound came out. I sat there like a fish, gasping for air, my mouth opening and closing, while my brain scrambled for words that wouldn't come. That's when the doorbell rang, cutting through the tension like a sword through silk. The sound was so unexpected, so perfectly timed, that for a moment I wondered if I was hallucinating. Everyone's attention immediately shifted away from me and toward the front of the house, and I felt a rush of relief so intense it made me dizzy. Without waiting for anyone else to move, I pushed back my chair and stood up so quickly that I knocked my napkin to the floor. My legs felt unsteady, like I'd been sitting for hours instead of minutes, but I managed to walk toward the front door without stumbling. Behind me, I could hear the murmur of confused voices and the scrape of chairs as other family members turned to watch my retreat. Walking through Grandma Rose's living room felt like moving through a museum of my own inadequacy. Every step took me past evidence of the life I was supposed to want, but had never quite managed to achieve. The family photos on the mantle told the story of Richardson's success through the generations: college graduations, wedding days, promotions, achievements. There was Jessica in her cap and gown at Arizona State. There was Dad shaking hands. with his boss after a major promotion. There was Mom at her retirement party from the school district where she'd taught for 30 years. And then there were the few photos that included me, scattered among the more triumphant moments like question marks in a story that otherwise made perfect sense. Me at my high school graduation, looking uncertain even in my moment of accomplishment. Me at Jessica's wedding, standing awkwardly in the background while she glowed in the center of attention. Me at various family gatherings over the years, always seeming slightly out of place, always looking like I was trying too hard or not trying hard enough. By the time I reached the front door, my hands had stopped shaking, but my heart was still pounding like I'd just run a marathon. I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself before facing whoever was on the other side. The last thing I needed was to answer the door looking like I'd just been through an emotional meat grinder, especially if it was a neighbor or friend of the family who would ask awkward questions about why I looked so upset. The Richardson family had always operated like a well-oiled machine, and I'd spent my entire life trying to figure out where I fit in the mechanical precision of it all. Every member had a role, a function, a clearly defined place in the hierarchy that had been established long before I was old enough to question it. Understanding that system was crucial to understanding why Aunt Linda's words hit so hard, why they carried the weight of institutional authority rather than just one person's opinion. At the top of the food chain sat my father, David Richardson, and his brother Michael. They were the success stories of their generation, the ones who had taken the modest middle-class upbringing their parents provided and transformed it into something bigger. Dad worked in commercial real estate development, turning empty lots into shopping centers and office buildings across the Phoenix metropolitan area. Uncle Mike owned 3 restaurants in Scottsdale, each one more successful than the last. Catering, to the kind of clientele that didn't blink at $30 entrees and $15 cocktails. These 2 men had set the template for what success looked like in our family. It meant steady growth, measurable results, and the kind of stability that allowed you to make plans 5 and 10 years into the future. It meant owning things, businesses, properties, assets that appreciated over time. It meant being able to write checks without checking your balance first, taking vacations without worrying about the cost, and sending your children to good colleges without taking out loans. Their wives, my mother Carol and Aunt Linda, had followed a different but equally respected path. Both had been teachers before they became mothers, and both had transitioned into supporting their husbands' careers while managing the social and domestic aspects of family life. They were the organizers, the networkers, the ones who remembered birthdays and anniversaries and made sure everyone stayed connected across the sprawling branches of our extended family tree. Mom taught elementary school for 15 years before Jessica was born, and everyone still talked about what a wonderful teacher she'd been, how much her students loved her, how she could handle even the most difficult children with patience and creativity. After Jessica and I came along, she channeled that same energy into being the perfect mother and wife, room mother for our classes, volunteer coordinator for church events, the one who hosted every holiday gathering with seamless grace. Aunt E. Linda had taken a similar path, though she'd always been more ambitious in her own way. After her teaching years, she'd opened a boutique clothing store in Old Town Scottsdale that catered to wealthy tourists and locals who wanted unique pieces they couldn't find at department stores. It wasn't Amazon or Microsoft, but it was hers, and it had been profitable enough to help fund their children's college educations and their yearly trips to Europe. Then came the next generation, where the family's expectations for continued success were even higher. Jessica had been the golden child from the moment she could walk and talk. She was the one who brought home perfect report cards without being asked, who participated in student government and honor society, who dated the right boys and chose the right major, and graduated summa cum laude from Arizona State's business program. Jessica's career trajectory had been a masterclass in strategic planning. She'd started at Pinnacle Financial as a junior marketing associate straight out of college, and had climbed the ladder with methodical precision. Every promotion came exactly when it was supposed to. Every salary increase was substantial enough to support the next level of lifestyle she was expected to maintain. She'd married Brad, a fellow business school graduate who worked in corporate finance, and together they represented everything our family valued: stability, growth, and the kind of success that could be measured in concrete terms. My cousin Ryan had followed a different but equally approved path. While Jessica conquered the corporate world, Ryan had chosen entrepreneurship, but the safe kind that everyone could understand and respect. His construction company specialized in custom homes for wealthy clients in Paradise Valley and Fountain Hills. He employed 12 people, had a fleet of trucks with his company logo, and was booked solid 18 months in advance. When family members talked about Ryan's business, they used words like established and reliable, and recession-proof. Even the younger cousins were already showing signs of following the family template. Emma, Ryan's little sister, was a senior in high school with a 4.3 GPA and early acceptance to the University of Arizona's business program. Tommy, Uncle Mike's youngest, was only 14, but already talking about studying restaurant management so he could eventually take over the family business. Everyone had a place, a role, a clear path from where they were to where they were supposed to be. Everyone except me. I'd spent my childhood and adolescence trying to figure out where I fit in this well-ordered universe, but I'd never quite managed to find my slot. I wasn't academic enough to follow Jessica's path, wasn't practical enough for Ryan's approach, wasn't social enough to flourish in the family's networking culture. I was the creative one, which in the Richardson family, vocabulary was code for impractical and unreliable, and needs to find something more substantial to fall back on. The family had tried to mold me into their vision of success. After college, when I'd spent 2 years writing freelance articles for local magazines and barely making enough money to cover my rent, Dad had pulled strings to get me the job in corporate communications at Henderson Development. It was a good job, a stable job, the kind of position that came with health insurance and paid vacation time and a clear advancement track. For 3 years, I'd tried to make it work. I'd shown up every morning at 8:30, answered emails about building permits and zoning variances, written press releases about groundbreaking ceremonies and ribbon cuttings. I'd attended company picnics and holiday parties, contributed to the 401k plan, and received annual reviews that consistently rated my performance as meets expectations. But something inside me had been slowly dying during those 3 years. I'd felt like I was wearing a costume that didn't quite fit, playing a role that belonged to someone else. Every morning when my alarm went off, I'd lie in bed for 10 extra minutes, trying to summon the energy to face another day of work that felt meaningless and soul-crushing. The family had been thrilled with my corporate success. Finally, Sarah was doing something they could understand and explain to their friends. She had a title, a salary, a path toward promotion, and greater responsibility. She was contributing to her 401k and talking about buying a condo and dating a nice accountant named Derek who played golf with Ryan on weekends. When I quit Henderson Development to start my social media marketing business, it felt to them like I was throwing away everything they'd worked to help me achieve. It wasn't just a career change. It was a rejection of their entire value system, a repudiation of everything they believed about security and responsibility and the right way to build a life. Looking back, I can trace the pattern of being made smaller back to my earliest memories, but it wasn't malicious or intentional. The Richardson family wasn't cruel or abusive. They were just locked into a way of thinking that had served them well for generations, and anyone who didn't fit the mold was gently but persistently encouraged to reshape themselves until they did. It started in elementary school, when I brought home artwork I was proud of and stories I'd written during creative writing time. While Jessica was getting praised for her math test scores and science fair projects, my creative efforts were met with polite smiles and carefully neutral responses. "That's very nice, sweetheart," Mom would say, looking at my watercolor painting of our backyard. Jessica, tell everyone about your presentation on the solar system. The message was subtle but clear. Creative pursuits were fine as hobbies, but they weren't the kind of achievements that deserved center stage at the dinner table. Art was something you did in your spare time, after you'd finished your real homework and completed your real responsibilities. In middle school, when I won the county-wide poetry contest with a piece about my grandmother's garden, the family's response was telling. They were proud, of course, and Mom even framed the certificate and hung it in the hallway. But the celebration lasted exactly one evening, and by the next family gathering, the conversation had moved on to Jessica's acceptance into the advanced placement program and Ryan's victory in the regional debate tournament. I learned to read the room, to understand what kinds of accomplishments generated enthusiasm and which ones were met with polite indifference. Academic achievements in math, science, and business were celebrated. Athletic victories were applauded. Leadership positions in student government or debate team were discussed at length. But creative writing awards, art show selections, and drama club performances were acknowledged briefly and then set aside in favor of more serious topics. High school brought new opportunities for me to discover where I didn't fit. While Jessica was being recruited for college honor programs and Ryan was starting his first business selling computer repair services to neighbors, I was falling in love with journalism and digital design. I started a blog about local music venues, learned how to use Photoshop and basic web design tools, and spent my afternoons interviewing musicians and writing concert reviews. The blog gained a small but dedicated following. Local bands started reaching out to me for coverage, and a few venues began offering me free tickets in exchange for honest reviews. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was building something that mattered, creating content that people actually wanted to read. But when I excitedly showed the family my latest post about an up-and-coming indie band, the response was underwhelming. Dad glanced at it for about 30 seconds before asking if I'd finished my college applications yet. Mom worried aloud about whether spending so much time at music venues was safe and appropriate for a teenage girl. Uncle Mike made a joke about hoping I wasn't planning to become a starving artist. The pattern was always the same. My interests and achievements were acknowledged but not celebrated, tolerated but not encouraged. The family wasn't trying to crush my spirit. They genuinely thought they were protecting me from disappointment and steering me toward a more secure future. In their minds, they were being loving and responsible by discouraging me from pursuing paths that seemed risky or impractical. College presented the perfect opportunity for them to redirect my energy toward something more substantial. When I declared a major in communications with a focus on digital media, the family rallied around the communications part and politely ignored the digital media aspect. Communications sounded like business, like something that could lead to a real career in corporate America. I spent 4 years studying everything I could about emerging digital platforms, social media marketing, content strategy, and online brand building. While my classmates were preparing for traditional advertising careers at big agencies, I was fascinated by the democratizing power of social media, the way small businesses could suddenly compete with major corporations if they understood how to connect authentically with their customers online. My senior capstone project was a comprehensive digital marketing campaign I developed for a local coffee shop that was struggling to compete with the big chains. I created content strategies for Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, designed graphics and videos, and helped them build an email marketing system that increased their customer retention by 40% over 6 months. The coffee shop owner was thrilled. She offered me a part-time job on the spot and started recommending me to other small business owners who needed help with their online presence. I was building a portfolio, gaining real experience, and making connections in the local small business community. But when I presented the project to my family, their focus was entirely on why I was wasting my communications degree on such a small client. Why wasn't I applying to major advertising agencies? Why wasn't I leveraging my education to land a position with a Fortune 500 company? Why was I thinking so small when I could be thinking big? They couldn't see that I wasn't thinking small. I was thinking differently. I wasn't interested in creating campaigns that convinced people to buy things they didn't need. I was excited about helping passionate entrepreneurs tell their stories authentically and connect with customers who genuinely valued what they were offering. I wanted to level the playing field, to give small businesses the same sophisticated marketing tools that had previously been available only to companies with massive budgets. After graduation, the pressure to conform intensified. Dad leveraged his business connections to help me land the job at Henderson Development, and the entire family breathed a collective sigh of relief. Finally, Sarah was on the right track. She had a corporate job with a respectable salary, health benefits, and room for advancement. She was dating someone appropriate, living in a nice apartment, building the kind of life that made sense to everyone. For 3 years, I tried to convince myself that they were right. I told myself that security was more important than passion, that stability was worth more than creativity, that I should be grateful for a good job even if it didn't fulfill me. I attended company meetings about projects I didn't care about, wrote reports that no one read, and slowly felt my soul shrinking to fit the expectations that surrounded me. The breaking point came during my 3rd annual review at Henderson. My supervisor, a well-meaning woman named Margaret who'd been with the company for 15 years, sat across from me in her beige office and delivered what she clearly thought was encouraging feedback. "You're doing solid work, Sarah," she said, reviewing my file. "Consistent, reliable, meeting all your deadlines. You're exactly the kind of employee we need more of." She paused, looking up at me with a smile that was meant to be reassuring. "I think you're ready for the next step. We're going to recommend you for the Senior Communications Coordinator position that's opening up next quarter. It comes with a nice salary bump and your own assistant. You'll be handling some of our bigger clients, maybe even doing some traveling to project sites." I should have been thrilled. This was the advancement track I was supposed to want, the kind of promotion that would make my family proud and prove that their guidance had been right all along. But instead of excitement, I felt a crushing sense of despair. I could see my future stretching out ahead of me with terrifying clarity. 5 more years as Senior Communications Coordinator, then a promotion to Communications Manager, then maybe Communications Director if I played my cards right. 25 years of writing press releases about developments I didn't care about, attending meetings that accomplished nothing, climbing a ladder that led nowhere I actually wanted to go. That night, I sat in my corporate-appropriate apartment with my corporate-appropriate furniture and my corporate-appropriate life, and I realized that I was disappearing. The parts of me that had been excited about digital marketing and small business storytelling and creative problem-solving were being systematically starved out of existence. I was becoming exactly who my family wanted me to be, and it was killing me slowly from the inside. The first survival skill I developed was invisibility. Not the supernatural kind, but the practiced art of making myself small enough to avoid unwanted attention while staying visible enough to avoid being completely forgotten. It was a delicate balance that required constant recalibration, like tuning a radio to pick up a signal that kept shifting frequencies. I learned to read the emotional temperature of any room I entered within the first 30 seconds. Was this a gathering where enthusiasm would be welcome, or one where restraint was expected? Were people in the mood for storytelling, or were they focused on practical matters? Who held the conversational power, and how could I position myself to avoid accidentally challenging their authority? At family dinners, I became the question asker rather than the answer giver. While Jessica dominated conversations with updates about her latest promotion, or Ryan explained his newest construction project, I perfected the art of deflection through curiosity. "Tell me more about that client," I'd say when Ryan mentioned a challenging custom home project. "How did you decide to structure the timeline?" The questions kept the spotlight safely away from me while making me seem engaged and interested. I developed an arsenal of transitional phrases that could redirect attention whenever conversations threatened to focus on my life for too long. Speaking of marketing, Jessica, how's your campaign for the new investment products going? That reminds me, Uncle Mike, didn't you mention you were redesigning the menu at the Scottsdale location? These little verbal magic tricks allowed me to acknowledge whatever topic was being discussed while smoothly moving the conversation towards someone whose achievements were more family-friendly. The second skill was strategic helpfulness. I became the one who anticipated needs before they were expressed, who volunteered for tasks that kept me busy and useful but out of the conversational spotlight. I was the cousin who helped Grandma Rose set the table, who remembered to bring ice when everyone else brought side dishes, who stayed after dinner to help with cleanup while others moved to the living room for coffee and continued conversation. This helpfulness served multiple purposes. It made me indispensable enough that no one questioned my value to the family, even if they questioned my life choices. It kept my hands busy during the moments when anxiety threatened to overwhelm me. And it positioned me as the observer rather than the observed, giving me perfect vantage points to study the family dynamics that I was struggling to navigate. From my position in the kitchen, loading dishwashers and wrapping leftovers, I could hear every conversation happening in the dining room and living room. I learned which topics generated excitement and which ones created tension. I discovered who held grudges against whom, which marriages were struggling, which business ventures were more precarious than they appeared from the outside. I became an expert in reading between the lines, in understanding the subtext that ran beneath every family interaction. When Uncle Mike mentioned that the downtown restaurant was going through some challenges, I knew he meant they were losing money but didn't want to admit it publicly. When Aunt Linda talked about restructuring her boutique's inventory, I understood that online shopping was killing her business, but she was too proud to ask for help adapting to the digital marketplace. This observational skill turned out to be more valuable than I realized at the time. While everyone else was focused on managing their own image and presenting their best face to the family, I was developing a comprehensive understanding of the real challenges and opportunities that existed within our extended network. I saw where the gaps were, where traditional business models were failing, where digital solutions could make a difference. The third survival adaptation was emotional compartmentalization. I learned to separate my public family self from my private, authentic self, creating internal walls that protected my dreams and ambitions from the constant erosion of well-meaning but discouraging advice. In public, I became agreeable and accommodating. I nodded politely when Dad suggested I should consider going back to school for an MBA. I smiled and said, "I'll think about it," when Mom forwarded job postings for corporate communications positions. I thanked Uncle Mike for his offer to introduce me to his business contacts who might be able to help me find something more stable. But privately, I was nurturing the parts of myself that excited me most. I spent evenings and weekends learning everything I could about digital marketing trends, social media algorithms, and content creation strategies. I took online courses in graphic design and video editing. I studied successful small business, marketing campaigns, and analyzed what made them effective. I started small consulting projects on the side, helping friends and acquaintances with their social media presence in exchange for small fees and testimonials. A yoga instructor who needed help promoting her classes. A local bakery that wanted to increase their online orders. A real estate agent who was struggling to compete with colleagues who had bigger marketing budgets. These projects were my secret laboratory, where I could experiment with strategies and techniques without the pressure of family scrutiny. Every small success built my confidence, and every lesson learned made me better at the work I was passionate about. I was building a parallel career in the shadows, developing skills and relationships that my family didn't even know existed. The fourth adaptation was selective vulnerability. I learned to share just enough of my struggles and uncertainties to maintain my family's sense that I was still reachable, still open to their guidance, while protecting the parts of my vision that were too fragile to withstand their skepticism. When I finally made the decision to leave Henderson Development and launch my own business, I presented it to the family as a carefully calculated risk rather than a leap of faith. I had spreadsheets showing my projected income and expenses. I had a business plan with conservative growth estimates. I had already lined up 3 clients who were ready to work with me as soon as I made the transition. But I didn't tell them about the nights I lay awake wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. I didn't share my fears about health insurance and retirement planning and all the safety nets I was giving up. I didn't admit that sometimes the gap between my current reality and my vision of success felt so enormous that I couldn't see how I'd ever bridge it. Instead, I presented the version of myself that they could handle: rational, prepared, taking calculated risks based on market research and careful planning. I let them think I was being somewhat impractical, but not completely irresponsible. It was a delicate performance that required me to constantly monitor their reactions and adjust my messaging accordingly. The final adaptation was the development of an internal validation system that could function independently of external approval. This was the hardest skill to master because it meant rewiring psychological patterns that had been developing since childhood. I started measuring my progress in ways that had nothing to do with what my family valued. Instead of focusing on salary increases or title changes, I celebrated client retention rates and creative breakthroughs. Instead of comparing myself to Jessica's corporate trajectory, I measured my success against my own benchmarks. How many small businesses I was helping grow, how much more confident I felt with each new challenge, how authentically I was able to show up in my work. I created private rituals to acknowledge my achievements when no one else would. After landing a new client, I'd treat myself to dinner at a nice restaurant and toast my success with a glass of wine. When a client saw significant growth as a result of our work together, I'd write myself a congratulatory email and save it in a folder labeled Evidence for the days when doubt crept in. Most importantly, I started building relationships with people who understood and valued what I was trying to accomplish. I joined professional organizations for digital marketers and small business consultants. I attended networking events where entrepreneurs gathered to share challenges and celebrate victories. I found mentors who had walked similar paths and could offer guidance based on experience rather than fear. These relationships became my lifeline during the dark moments when family pressure threatened to undermine my confidence. When Dad questioned whether I was building anything sustainable, I could remind myself of the mentor who had told me that my client retention rate was better than most agencies with 10 times my experience. When Aunt Linda worried about my financial security, I could think of the successful entrepreneurs I knew who had started with even less than I had. Building this internal validation system didn't happen overnight, and it required constant maintenance. The old patterns of seeking external approval were deeply ingrained, and there were still moments when a comment from a family member could send me spiraling into self-doubt. But gradually, I developed the ability to distinguish between feedback that was useful and criticism that was simply a reflection of someone else's fears and limitations. By the time I walked into that Christmas dinner wearing my thrift store sweater and carrying my hard-earned confidence, I had survived 2 years of intensive adaptation training. I had learned to protect my dreams while staying connected to my family, to build something meaningful while managing their expectations, to remain vulnerable enough to love and be loved while staying strong enough to pursue my own vision of success. The skills I had developed during those survival years would prove to be invaluable as my business grew and faced new challenges. The ability to read between the lines helped me understand what clients really needed, even when they couldn't articulate it clearly. The practice of strategic helpfulness translated into exceptional customer service that set my business apart from competitors. The emotional compartmentalization allowed me to stay focused on long-term goals, even when short-term setbacks threatened to derail my progress. Most importantly, the internal validation system I had built became the foundation for authentic confidence that couldn't be shaken by external criticism or temporary failures. When Aunt Linda delivered her devastating question that Christmas evening, it stung, but it didn't destroy me. I had become strong enough to weather the storm of family disapproval while staying true to the vision that had sustained me through the hardest parts of the journey. The conversation that shattered my last thread of hope for family understanding happened on a Tuesday evening in March, exactly 9 months before that fateful Christmas dinner. I had been riding high on what felt like the first real breakthrough of my entrepreneurial journey, and in my excitement, I made the mistake of believing that success might finally translate into acceptance. The breakthrough had come in the form of Bella Vista Fitness, a struggling gym owned by a woman named Carmen Rodriguez, who had invested her life savings into creating a wellness space for women in Midtown Phoenix. Carmen had built something beautiful. A converted warehouse with natural light streaming through skylights, state-of-the-art equipment, and a community atmosphere that made every member feel like family. But despite having the most innovative fitness programs in the city and a waiting list for personal training sessions, she was hemorrhaging money because no one knew she existed. Traditional advertising was beyond her budget. She couldn't afford radio spots or newspaper ads, and her attempts at social media had consisted of posting blurry photos of exercise equipment with captions like, "Come work out today." She was 3 months behind on rent and considering closing the doors when her accountant, who happened to be a friend of a friend, mentioned my name. I spent our first meeting walking through the gym, talking with members, and understanding what made Bella Vista special. It wasn't just the equipment or the classes, it was the culture Carmen had created. Women who had never set foot in a gym felt comfortable there. Mothers brought their toddlers to childcare while they worked out. Women in their 60s were lifting weights alongside college athletes. Everyone knew each other's names, celebrated each other's victories, and showed up not just for fitness but for community. The challenge was communicating that magic to people who had never experienced it. Traditional marketing spoke about calories burned and muscles built, but Bella Vista was really selling transformation, confidence, and belonging. We needed to tell stories, not just promote services. I developed a comprehensive digital strategy that focused on authentic storytelling. Instead of posting generic fitness content, we started sharing member transformation stories, not just physical changes, but emotional ones. Maria, a single mother of 3, who found her first hour of peace each day in Carmen's yoga classes. Jennifer, a breast cancer survivor, who rebuilt her strength and confidence through personal training. Lisa, a corporate executive, who discovered that her early morning boxing sessions gave her the mental clarity to handle high-stress boardroom negotiations. We created video content that showed real workouts with real women of all shapes, sizes, and fitness levels. We hosted live Q&A sessions where Carmen answered questions about exercise modifications for injuries, nutrition for busy parents, and how to build sustainable fitness habits. We partnered with local businesses to cross-promote services. The healthy meal prep company down the street, the chiropractor who understood sports injuries, the boutique that sold workout clothes in extended sizes. Within 6 months, Bella Vista's membership had doubled. The waiting list for personal training sessions grew to 8 weeks. Carmen hired 2 additional trainers and expanded her class schedule to include early morning and late evening options for working parents. Most importantly, she was profitable for the first time since opening, with enough financial stability to sign a long-term lease and plan for expansion. The success was intoxicating, not just because of the numbers, but because of the impact. I wasn't just helping a business grow. I was part of creating something that genuinely improved people's lives. Every transformation story we shared represented a real person who felt stronger, more confident, more connected to community because of what we had built together. But the moment that should have been pure celebration was tainted by my desperate need for family validation. Carmen had given me a glowing testimonial that I was incredibly proud of, and she had referred 3 other small business owners who wanted similar help with their digital marketing. I felt like I was finally hitting my stride, finally proving that my chosen path could lead to meaningful success. So I called my father. It was a Thursday evening, and I caught him just as he was finishing dinner. Mom was cleaning up in the background, and I could hear the familiar sounds of their evening routine: dishes clinking, the dishwasher being loaded, the television news starting in the living room. "Dad, I have some really exciting news to share," I began, unable to contain my enthusiasm. "You know the fitness studio I've been working with? Bella Vista? We just hit incredible milestones. Their membership has grown by 120% in 6 months. They've hired additional staff, and the owner says our marketing strategy saved her business." There was a pause, during which I could hear him chewing thoughtfully. "That's nice, honey," he said finally, in the tone of voice he usually reserved for updates about my grocery shopping or the weather. "Dad, this is really significant. Carmen, that's the owner. She's referring other business owners to me. Word is spreading about the results we're getting. I think I'm really building something here." Another pause, longer this time. "Sarah, I'm glad you're helping this woman with her little gym. That's very nice of you. But you know what would be even better? If you could leverage this experience into a position at a real marketing firm. You could put this on your resume, show that you have hands-on experience, and then apply for account executive positions at agencies that work with major corporate clients." The words hit me like ice water. He wasn't hearing what I was telling him. The success I was describing, the transformation I was witnessing, the business I was building, none of it registered as real achievement in his mind. It was just a resume bullet point, a stepping stone toward what he considered legitimate work. "Dad, I don't want to work at a traditional agency. What I'm doing is working. I'm profitable, I'm growing, I'm making a real difference for small business owners who can't afford big agency fees." "Sweetheart," and I could hear the patience wearing thin in his voice. "You can't build a career on helping small businesses. There's no security in that. What happens when the economy turns and these little shops can't afford to pay you anymore? What about health insurance? What about retirement planning? You're 27 years old. You need to start thinking about your future." The conversation that followed was one I'd had a dozen times before, but this time felt different because I was coming from a place of actual success rather than just hope and ambition. I had proof that my approach worked, evidence that small businesses needed exactly what I was offering, and clients who were willing to pay good money for results they couldn't get anywhere else. But none of that mattered to Dad. He had decided years ago what my future should look like, and no amount of evidence to the contrary was going to change his mind. "I know you think you're building something," he continued, "but you have to be realistic. Jessica just got promoted to senior director. She's managing a team of 15 people now, working with Fortune 500 clients, making decisions that affect millions of dollars in investment products. That's the kind of career that leads somewhere." There it was again, the comparison to Jessica, the measuring stick against which all other achievements paled. It didn't matter that Jessica and I had completely different strengths, interests, and definitions of success. It didn't matter that I was building something authentic and sustainable rather than climbing someone else's corporate ladder. What mattered was that her path was recognizable, and mine wasn't. "I'm not trying to be Jessica," I said, and I could hear my voice getting smaller despite my best efforts to stay confident. "I'm trying to build something that uses my skills and serves people who need help." "I understand that, honey, but you have to think practically. Maybe you could do this consulting thing on the side while you build a real career. Get a stable job with benefits. Work on these little projects in your spare time. That way you'd have the best of both worlds." The suggestion felt like a knife twisting in my chest. He was asking me to treat my passion, my calling, my emerging expertise as a hobby. He was suggesting that the work that energized me most, that produced the best results, that felt most aligned with who I was becoming, should be relegated to evenings and weekends while I spent my prime energy on something practical. "Dad, what if this is my real career? What if helping small businesses grow is exactly what I'm meant to be doing? What if I don't want the traditional path everyone expects me to follow?" The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear Mom moving around in the kitchen, probably listening to our conversation but choosing not to intervene. I could hear the television murmuring in the background, some news anchor discussing the day's events with practiced authority. When Dad finally spoke, his voice carried a finality that crushed what remained of my hope for his understanding. "Sarah, you're a smart girl, but you're also young and idealistic. You think you can change the world, and that's admirable, but it's not realistic. Small business consulting isn't a career, it's a side hustle at best. If you want to help people, get a job at a nonprofit with steady funding. If you want to do marketing, work for an agency with established clients and proven systems. But this thing you're doing, it's not sustainable. And the longer you put off making adult decisions about your future, the harder it's going to be to catch up to where you should be at your age." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Not just for my current business endeavors, but for any hope that my family would ever see me as someone capable of charting her own course toward success. In Dad's mind, I wasn't an entrepreneur building something meaningful. I was a confused, young woman playing with hobbies while avoiding real responsibility. After I hung up the phone, I sat in my studio apartment staring at Carmen's testimonial letter, which was taped to my bathroom mirror where I could see it every morning. Her words, written in careful cursive on Bella Vista letterhead, told a story that contradicted everything my father had just said. Sarah's marketing strategy didn't just grow our business, it saved it. Her understanding of digital storytelling and community building transformed how we connect with our members. She took the time to understand what makes Bella Vista special and helped us communicate that authentically to people who needed what we offer. Working with Sarah felt like having a creative partner who genuinely cared about our success. I can't recommend her highly enough to any small business owner who wants to grow sustainably while staying true to their values. Two completely different versions of reality. In Carmen's world, I was a skilled professional who delivered transformative results for businesses that desperately needed help. In my father's world, I was a confused idealist who needed to grow up and get serious about my future. The cognitive dissonance was crushing. How could I trust my own perception of success when the people who had known me longest and supposedly loved me most couldn't see any value in what I was accomplishing? That night, I called my sister Jessica, hoping for a different perspective. Maybe she, of all people, could help me understand how to bridge the gap between my family's expectations and my own vision of meaningful work. Jessica listened patiently while I described the conversation with Dad, and I could hear genuine sympathy in her voice when she responded. "Sarah, I think Dad just worries about you. The business world is competitive and unpredictable, and he's seen a lot of small businesses fail over the years. He wants you to have security, the kind of foundation that lets you take risks later when you're more established." "But I am established," I protested. "I have clients, I have testimonials, I have proven results. I'm profitable and growing. What more establishment do I need?" "I know, and what you're doing sounds really cool. But you have to understand Dad's perspective. He's built his success through relationships with major developers, multi-million-dollar projects, partnerships with banks and investment firms. In his world, working with small businesses feels limited. Limited." There was that word again, the one that followed me everywhere I went in family conversations. My vision was limited, my client base was limited, my potential for growth was limited. "What if I don't want unlimited growth?" I asked. "What if I want to do work that matters to me, with people I genuinely want to help, building something sustainable rather than just profitable?" "That's beautiful, Sarah, and I admire that about you. But you also have to think about the practical side. What happens when you want to buy a house? What about saving for retirement? What if you want to have kids someday? You need financial stability for all of that." The conversation with Jessica was kinder than the one with Dad, but it led to the same conclusion. Even my most supportive family member couldn't envision a future where my chosen path led to the kind of security and success they valued. I was swimming upstream against a current of conventional wisdom that viewed my entrepreneurial efforts as a charming phase that would eventually give way to more practical considerations. After hanging up with Jessica, I sat in the growing darkness of my apartment, wrestling with questions that felt impossible to answer. Was I being naive and idealistic, as Dad suggested? Was I sacrificing long-term security for short-term satisfaction? Was the validation I felt from clients like Carmen enough to sustain a career, or was I just postponing the inevitable reckoning with reality? The doubt was insidious, creeping into every corner of my confidence. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was playing with hobbies while avoiding adult responsibilities. Maybe I should find a stable job and do consulting work on the side, building financial security first and passion second. But even as those thoughts circled through my mind, something deeper resisted them. The work I was doing with small businesses felt more important, more meaningful, more aligned with my values than anything I had ever done in corporate environments. The growth I was facilitating, the communities I was helping build, the authentic connections I was creating between businesses and customers, none of that felt like playing or pretending or avoiding responsibility. That night marked the beginning of a 9-month period of internal warfare between the part of me that craved family approval and the part of me that knew I was exactly where I belonged. Every family gathering became a test of my resolve. Every success in my business was shadowed by questions about whether it was enough, whether it was real, whether it was sustainable. The final straw wasn't actually the Christmas dinner disaster. It was the slow accumulation of months spent defending my choices to people who had already decided they were wrong. By December, I was exhausted from trying to translate my vision into language my family could understand, tired of minimizing my achievements to avoid conflict, drained from constantly second-guessing decisions that felt right in my bones. The Christmas dinner confrontation was just the moment when all that accumulated doubt and defensiveness crystallized into a single, devastating question that I couldn't answer with spreadsheets or testimonials or logical arguments. When Aunt Linda asked when I was going to stop pretending and get a real job, she was voicing what my entire family had been thinking for months. She was just brave enough, or drunk enough, to say it out loud. Before rising, the moments immediately following my escape from the Christmas dinner table felt like falling through space without a parachute. Walking toward Grandma Rose's front door, I experienced a kind of emotional vertigo that made me question everything I thought I knew about myself, my choices, and my future. My hands shook as I reached for the door handle, and for a terrifying moment, I wasn't sure I could trust my legs to support me. The adrenaline that had carried me away from Aunt Linda's devastating question was beginning to ebb, leaving behind a hollow sensation that felt like grief mixed with panic. The person at the door turned out to be a delivery driver with a package for the neighbor, an innocent mistake that somehow felt like a metaphor for my entire life, showing up at the wrong place with something nobody wanted at the worst possible time. I signed for the package and walked it 2 houses down, grateful for those extra minutes of cold air and solitude before I had to face the dinner table again. But when I returned to Grandma's house, I couldn't bring myself to go back inside immediately. Instead, I sat on the front porch steps, still wearing just my burgundy sweater in the crisp December evening, and let the full weight of the evening's humiliation settle over me like a lead blanket. The questions that had been circling my mind for months suddenly felt urgent and unanswerable. What if they were all right? What if I had been fooling myself about building something meaningful? What if the modest success I'd achieved with clients, like Carmen, was just a fluke, a temporary stroke of luck that would inevitably fade when reality set in? I thought about my bank account, which contained exactly $347 after paying December's portion of the shared office space Maria and I rented. I thought about the health insurance I'd cobbled together through the freelancer's marketplace, with its high deductible and limited coverage. I thought about the retirement planning I'd been postponing while I invested every spare dollar back into the business. Maybe Aunt Linda was right. Maybe I was pretending. Maybe I was a 28-year-old woman playing at being an entrepreneur while avoiding the real responsibilities of adulthood. The worst part was the isolation. Sitting on those porch steps, I felt utterly alone in a way that had nothing to do with physical proximity to other people. Inside the house, 23 family members were continuing their holiday celebration, probably relieved that the uncomfortable moment had passed and the awkward cousin had removed herself from the equation. They would go on with their evening, sharing dessert and coffee, exchanging gifts, making plans for next year's gathering, and I would be the footnote, the cautionary tale, the reminder of what happened when someone refused to follow the proven path to success and security. The loneliness wasn't just about that evening, though. It was the accumulated weight of months spent defending my choices to people who had already decided they were wrong. It was the exhaustion of constantly translating my vision into language that others could understand, only to watch their eyes glaze over or their expressions shift to polite concern. I had spent so much energy trying to prove that my path was valid that I had stopped checking in with myself about whether it was still fulfilling. Was I building this business because it genuinely excited me, or because I was too proud to admit defeat and crawl back to corporate security? The cold was starting to seep through my sweater, but I couldn't bring myself to move. Movement would require making a decision about what came next, and I felt paralyzed by the magnitude of the choice in front of me. I could go back inside, pretend nothing had happened, finish dinner with grace and dignity, and spend the next few months quietly transitioning back to a more conventional career path. The option was genuinely tempting. I could update my resume, leverage my small business consulting experience into a position at an established marketing agency, and build the kind of life my family understood and respected. I could have health insurance that didn't make me anxious, a 401k plan that my future self would thank me for, and the security of knowing exactly what my paycheck would be each month. I could also stop feeling like a fraud at family gatherings, stop defending my choices to people who only wanted the best for me, stop swimming upstream against a current of conventional wisdom that had served multiple generations of my family. Well, but even as I considered that path, something deep inside me recoiled from it. The thought of returning to the kind of corporate environment I'd left 3 years earlier felt like contemplating emotional suffocation. The idea of spending my days creating marketing campaigns for products I didn't care about, serving clients whose success felt disconnected from my own values, felt like a betrayal of everything I'd learned about myself during the past 2 years. The work I was doing with small businesses wasn't just a job, it was a calling. Every client relationship taught me something new about entrepreneurship, creativity, and the courage required to build something meaningful from nothing. Every marketing campaign we developed felt like collaborative storytelling, helping passionate business owners communicate their authentic vision to people who needed what they offered. But calling or not, I was broke. I was isolated. I was sitting on my grandmother's porch in December, crying over a career path that half the people I loved most thought was a dead end. The sound of the front door opening behind me made me quickly wipe my eyes and try to compose myself. I expected to see Mom, coming to check on me with that mixture of concern and gentle guidance that she'd perfected over the years. Instead, it was Grandma Rose, moving slowly but purposefully toward the porch swing with 2 steaming mugs in her hands. "Thought you might be getting cold out here," she said, settling beside me and offering one of the mugs. Hot chocolate with the tiny marshmallows she'd been serving at Christmas for as long as I could remember. We sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, the warm mug heating my frozen fingers and the chocolate warming me from the inside out. Grandma Rose had always been the family member who talked the least, but observed the most, and I suspected she understood more about the evening's dynamics than anyone else inside. "You know," she said finally, her voice carrying the authority of 8 decades of watching family members navigate difficult decisions. "There was a time when your grandfather wanted to leave his job at the bank and start his own business." I looked at her in surprise. Grandpa Frank had worked at the same bank for 40 years before retiring, and I'd never heard anything about entrepreneurial ambitions. He had this idea for a small loan company that would serve people the banks wouldn't touch, she continued. Folks who needed money to start tiny businesses or buy used cars or handle emergencies. He'd spent years watching the bank turn away decent people who didn't fit their criteria, and he thought he could build something better. What happened? His father told him he was crazy, said he'd be throwing away a secure job with good benefits to chase a pipe dream. Said he had responsibilities to think about. We were newlyweds, planning to start a family, trying to buy our first house. Grandma Rose sipped her hot chocolate, and I could see the distant look in her eyes that meant she was traveling back through decades of memory. So he stayed at the bank, worked his way up to vice president, had a good career, provided well for our family. But there were always these moments when he'd read about someone else starting the kind of business he'd dreamed about, and I could see him wondering what might have been. Do you think he regretted staying? I think he regretted not trying. There's a difference between failing at something you believed in and never finding out if you could have succeeded. We sat with that observation for a while, watching Christmas lights twinkle in neighbors' windows and listening to the muffled sounds of conversation and laughter from inside the house. The thing about family, Grandma Rose said eventually, is that we love each other enough to worry. But sometimes we love each other so much that our worry gets in the way of our faith. What do you mean? Your Aunt Linda, your father, your mother. They see you taking risks that scare them. And their fear comes out as criticism or advice. But underneath all that worry is the fact that they love you and want you to be safe and happy. It doesn't feel like love when they tell me I'm wasting my life. No, I imagine it doesn't. But maybe the question isn't whether they understand what you're doing. Maybe the question is whether you understand it well enough to keep doing it even when they don't. That night, after the family gathering finally ended and everyone had exchanged hugs and promises to get together soon, I drove home through empty Phoenix streets thinking about Grandma Rose's words. The conversation had shifted something inside. Me, not toward confidence exactly, but toward a kind of clarity about the choice I was facing. The path forward wasn't going to be about convincing my family that I was right. It wasn't going to be about accumulating enough success to silence their doubts or prove their concerns unfounded. It was going to be about developing enough inner certainty to pursue my vision, regardless of whether anyone else understood it. Back in my studio apartment, I sat cross-legged on my bed with my laptop open, staring at the presentation Maria and I had been working on for the past month. Monday morning, we would be pitching our services to a potential client whose business could change the trajectory of everything we were building. The client was a chain of family-owned restaurants that had been struggling to compete with corporate franchises and food delivery apps. They had incredible food, loyal customers in their original locations, and a family recipe collection that spanned 3 generations. But they were invisible online. Their marketing was inconsistent across locations, and their younger demographic was choosing flashier competitors that knew how to leverage social media and digital engagement. If we could land this contract, it would be our biggest client by far, with enough revenue to support both of our salaries and allow us to hire additional team members. It would also serve as a case study for the kind of comprehensive digital transformation that could attract even larger clients down the road. But if we didn't land it, we would be back to the drawing board, scrambling for smaller projects and wondering how long we could sustain the financial uncertainty of entrepreneurial life. The presentation was good, maybe the best work we'd ever done. We'd researched every aspect of their business, analyzed their competition, and developed a strategy that balanced respect for their family traditions with the digital innovation. They needed to thrive in a changing marketplace. But sitting there in the aftermath of the Christmas dinner disaster, I found myself paralyzed by doubt. What if our presentation wasn't enough? What if they chose a larger, more established agency? What if Aunt Linda's words had been prophetic rather than just cruel? For the first time since starting my business, I seriously considered what it would mean to give up. I could call my former supervisor at Henderson Development, explain that I'd learned valuable skills during my entrepreneurial experiment, and ask if there were any openings for someone with my background. I could swallow my pride, admit that the family skeptics had been right, and rebuild my life along more conventional lines. The thought was simultaneously terrifying and tempting. Terrifying because it would mean abandoning everything I'd worked to build, but tempting because it would end the constant uncertainty, the financial stress, and the exhausting need to defend my choices to people I loved. I fell asleep that night without resolving anything, caught between a vision that excited me and a reality that scared me, between the person I was becoming and the person everyone expected me to be. The decision came to me at 3:47 a.m. on December 27th, in that liminal space between sleep and waking when the rational mind loosens its grip and deeper truths have room to surface. I woke up with absolute clarity about what I needed to do, as if my subconscious had been working through the problem while I slept and finally arrived at a solution that my conscious mind could accept. I wasn't going to quit. I wasn't going to apologize for my choices or minimize my vision to make other people comfortable. I wasn't going to treat my calling as a hobby or my business as a phase I needed to outgrow, but I also wasn't going to keep seeking validation from people who were fundamentally incapable of understanding what I was building. The energy I'd been spending on trying to convince my family that my path was valid needed to be redirected toward actually walking that path with more intentionality and commitment than ever before. Sitting up in bed in the pre-dawn darkness, I made a promise to myself that felt as solemn and binding as any vow I'd ever spoken. For the next 12 months, I would give my business everything I had, not the divided attention I'd been offering, while constantly second-guessing myself, but the full force of my creativity, intelligence, and determination. I would stop hedging my bets and start betting on myself completely. I would stop planning for failure and start planning for the kind of success that would require me to grow into a bigger version of myself. I would stop asking permission to pursue my vision and start taking the kind of bold action that my vision deserved. The first change was financial. I had been living conservatively, keeping enough money in savings to cover 3 months of basic expenses in case the business failed, and I needed time to find a corporate job. That safety net had provided emotional comfort, but it had also given me an excuse to play it safe with business decisions that required bigger investments. That morning, I transferred all but $500 from my savings account into my business account. The money would fund better equipment, professional development courses, and the kind of marketing materials that would position Santos and Richardson as a premium consultancy rather than a scrappy startup. The decision terrified me and exhilarated me in equal measure. Without that financial cushion, I couldn't afford to fail slowly or gracefully. I would have to succeed, and succeed quickly, or face the kind of consequences that would make Aunt Linda's criticisms look gentle by comparison. The second change was social. I started declining family invitations that I knew would drain my energy or undermine my confidence. When Mom called to invite me to lunch with her book club, I politely explained that I was in a crucial growth phase with my business and needed to focus my social energy on networking events and client development. It felt selfish and ungrateful at first, but I gradually realized that protecting my emotional bandwidth was as important as managing my financial resources. Every hour I spent defending my choices to skeptical relatives was an hour I wasn't spending on activities that actually moved my business forward. I also started actively seeking out relationships with people who understood entrepreneurship from the inside. I joined the Phoenix chapter of the National Association of Women Business Owners, started attending monthly networking events hosted by the local Small Business Administration office, and connected with other consultants and agency owners through professional online communities. These relationships became my lifeline during the dark moments when doubt crept in. When I questioned whether I was building something sustainable, I could talk to Sarah, who had grown her graphic design studio from a dining room table operation to a team of 8 employees over 5 years. When I worried about financial instability, I could learn from Mike, whose marketing consultancy had weathered 2 economic downturns and emerged stronger each time. Most importantly, these connections showed me that the path I was walking wasn't as unusual or risky as my family believed. Thousands of people were building successful businesses by serving small and medium-sized companies that couldn't afford big agency fees. There was a thriving ecosystem of entrepreneurs who had chosen independence over security and were creating meaningful, profitable work for themselves and their teams. The third change was psychological. I stopped measuring my success against Jessica's corporate achievements or Ryan's traditional business model. Instead, I developed metrics that reflected what I actually wanted to build: client satisfaction scores, repeat business percentages, the number of small businesses that saw measurable growth as a result of our work together. I created a private document where I tracked these alternative success indicators, updating it weekly with evidence that my business was moving in the right direction. When clients sent thank you emails describing how our work had helped them hire new employees or expand to new locations, I saved those messages in a folder labeled Impact Evidence. When a local business magazine featured one of our clients in a success story that highlighted their digital marketing transformation, I framed the article and hung it in our office. When former clients referred new businesses to us, I celebrated those referrals as evidence that we were building a reputation based on results rather than marketing promises. This shift in measurement criteria was liberation. Instead of constantly comparing myself to family members who were succeeding in completely different fields, I could focus on becoming excellent at the specific work I had chosen to do. The fourth change was strategic. I stopped taking on clients who weren't genuinely excited about working with us or who saw digital marketing as an afterthought rather than a growth investment. The desperation that had led me to accept any project that came through the door was replaced by confidence that we could afford to be selective about the businesses we chose to serve. This selectivity had an unexpected benefit. The clients who did work with us were more engaged, more willing to implement our recommendations, and more likely to see dramatic results. Their success stories became powerful marketing tools that attracted other high-quality prospects, creating a virtuous cycle of growth and improvement. I also started positioning Santos and Richardson more aggressively in the market. Instead of describing ourselves as affordable social media help for small businesses, we began presenting ourselves as growth strategists for ambitious entrepreneurs who understand the value of authentic digital marketing. The language shift reflected a deeper change in how I thought about our value proposition. We weren't the budget option for businesses that couldn't afford real marketing. We were the specialized option for businesses that wanted marketing that actually worked. The fifth and most important change was internal. I stopped apologizing for my ambition and started owning it fully. When people asked what I did for work, I no longer prefaced my answer with disclaimers about being still figuring things out or trying something entrepreneurial. I simply said, I run a digital marketing consultancy that helps small businesses grow through authentic online engagement. I stopped minimizing our successes when talking to family members. When Mom asked how business was going, instead of saying, pretty good, or we're making progress, I started sharing specific achievements. We just helped a client increase their revenue by 40% in 6 months, and they're planning to open a second location based on the growth we've generated. Together. The confidence wasn't fake or manufactured. It was the natural result of finally aligning my external presentation with the internal conviction that had been growing steadily throughout my entrepreneurial journey. The work we were doing was valuable, the results we were generating were real, and the business we were building was worthy of respect. This internal shift had external consequences that I hadn't anticipated. Potential clients started responding more positively to our sales presentations because I was presenting our services with genuine enthusiasm rather than defensive uncertainty. Professional contacts began referring more opportunities our way because I sounded like someone who was building something substantial rather than experimenting with a side project. Even my family started responding differently, though subtly. Dad still worried about my lack of corporate benefits, but he stopped suggesting that I should look for real jobs. Mom still asked concerned questions about my financial stability, but she also started mentioning my business when talking to her friends about what her daughters were doing with their careers. The commitment I made that December morning wasn't just about working harder or taking bigger risks. It was about fundamentally changing my relationship with my own ambition, treating my vision as something worth defending rather than something that needed constant justification. The change was subtle but profound. Instead of building a business, while secretly hoping my family would eventually approve of my choices, I started building a business that reflected my own values and goals, regardless of external validation. Instead of trying to prove that entrepreneurship could be just as secure as traditional employment, I embraced the uncertainty as an essential feature of the path I had chosen. By the time Maria and I walked into our meeting with the restaurant chain that cold Monday morning in January, I felt like a different person than the one who had sat crying on Grandma Rose's porch just 2 weeks earlier. I was still nervous about the presentation, still aware of how much this contract could mean for our future, but I was no longer questioning whether I deserved to be in that room or whether the vision we were presenting was worthy of serious consideration. The shift in my energy was palpable, and I could see it reflected in how potential clients responded to our presentations. When you believe completely in the value of what you're offering, that conviction becomes contagious. When you're no longer apologizing for your ambition, people start taking your ambition seriously. The commitment ceremony that happened in my pre-dawn bedroom wasn't witnessed by anyone else, but it changed everything about how I approached my work, my relationships, and my own sense of possibility. It was the moment I stopped asking permission to build something meaningful and started taking full responsibility for making it happen. The months that followed my December awakening were unlike anything I'd experienced before in my life. It wasn't the gradual climb I'd expected, but rather a series of intense challenges that tested every skill I'd developed and pushed me beyond what I thought was possible. By February, I realized that my commitment to betting everything on myself hadn't just changed my business approach, it had fundamentally altered who I was becoming as a person. The first major test came when our biggest client, a chain of yoga studios that represented 30% of our revenue, decided to terminate their contract without warning. The owner, Patricia, called on a Thursday afternoon to inform me that they'd hired an internal marketing coordinator and would no longer need our services. Her tone was apologetic but firm, and I could tell the decision was final before she'd finished explaining their reasoning. Losing that contract should have devastated me financially and emotionally. 6 months earlier, it would have sent me into a spiral of self-doubt and probably would have triggered another round of desperate family consultations about whether I should return to traditional employment. But something had shifted in how I processed setbacks. Instead of catastrophizing about what the loss meant for my future, I found myself immediately thinking about how to replace the revenue and what lessons could be extracted from the experience. The key insight was that we'd become too dependent on large clients who could unilaterally reshape our financial stability with a single decision. Rather than seeking another whale client to replace Patricia's studios, Maria and I decided to focus on building a more diversified portfolio of medium-sized businesses that would provide greater stability and allow us to serve each client more effectively. This shift in strategy required us to completely reimagine our sales and marketing approach. Instead of pursuing a few large contracts, we needed to efficiently attract and serve a larger number of smaller clients. We developed streamlined onboarding processes, created standardized service packages, and implemented systems that allowed us to maintain our personalized approach while dramatically increasing our client capacity. The transformation was exhausting, but exhilarating. We worked 16-hour days for weeks, redesigning everything from our initial client consultations to our ongoing reporting systems. But with each improvement, I could feel us becoming a more sophisticated and resilient organization. By April, we had not only replaced the lost revenue but exceeded it. Our client base had grown from 8 businesses to 23, spanning industries from professional services to retail to healthcare. More importantly, we'd proven to ourselves that our business model could adapt and thrive even when faced with significant disruptions. The second major challenge emerged in May when Microsoft announced they were seeking a regional marketing partner for their new small business technology initiative. The opportunity was enormous, a 3-year exclusive contract worth over $1 million annually to help small businesses across the Southwest integrate Microsoft's productivity tools with their marketing strategies. But applying for the partnership meant competing against agencies with 10 times our experience and resources. The application process alone required 40 hours of research, strategic planning, and presentation development. For weeks, I wrestled with whether we were ready for such a massive opportunity or if pursuing it would distract us from the steady growth we'd been building. The decision to apply came down to a simple question. Were we building a business that played it safe? Or were we building one that pursued its full potential? The answer was obvious, even if the path forward felt terrifying. Our application presentation took place in Microsoft's Phoenix offices on a scorching June morning. Maria and I had rehearsed our pitch dozens of times, but walking into that conference, room filled with executives still felt surreal. These were people who made decisions affecting millions of small businesses worldwide, and they were taking our 2-year-old consultancy seriously as a potential strategic partner. Instead of leading with our limited experience, we focused on what made us uniquely valuable: our deep understanding of small business challenges, our proven ability to translate complex technology concepts into practical growth strategies, and our track record of helping local entrepreneurs achieve measurable results through digital marketing. The presentation lasted 90 minutes and covered everything from our philosophy about technology adoption to our detailed plans for serving businesses across 4 states. The questions were challenging, but I found myself energized rather than intimidated by their complexity. This was the kind of work we'd been building toward, even if we hadn't fully realized it until the opportunity presented itself. 3 weeks later, David Park from Microsoft called to inform us that Santos and Richardson had been selected as their exclusive small business technology marketing partner for the Southwest region. The contract would begin in September, giving us 3 months to scale our team and develop the infrastructure necessary to serve clients across Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, and Colorado. The news was overwhelming in the best possible way. We'd gone from a scrappy local consultancy to Microsoft's chosen partner for small business marketing in one of their fastest-growing regions. But the real validation wasn't the prestige of the Microsoft brand. It was the recognition that what we'd built was valuable enough to scale at the highest levels of corporate partnership. The months that followed were a blur of hiring, training, system development, and strategic planning. We moved to a larger office space, implemented enterprise-level project management systems, and built a team capable of serving hundreds of small businesses while maintaining the personalized approach that had made us successful in the first place. But perhaps the most significant change was internal. Working with Microsoft forced me to think like a genuine executive rather than a freelancer who'd grown a successful practice. I had to make decisions about organizational structure, develop leadership capabilities in our growing team, and navigate the complex dynamics of representing a global technology company while staying true to our core values. The transformation was profound and permanent. I was no longer someone who happened to run a marketing consultancy. I had become someone who understood business strategy, technology integration, and organizational development at levels that positioned us as genuine experts in our field. By November, our Microsoft partnership was exceeding all performance targets. Small businesses enrolled in their technology initiative were seeing average revenue increases of 43% within 6 months of working with our team. Microsoft was so pleased with our results that they'd already begun discussions about expanding our partnership into additional regions. But the success metrics that mattered most to me weren't financial. They were the transformation stories of the businesses we were helping. Rosa Martinez, who had built her catering company into the most sought-after event service in Albuquerque after implementing our digital marketing strategies. James Chen, whose financial planning practice had tripled its client base by leveraging the automation tools we'd helped him integrate. Stephanie Williams, whose boutique fitness studio had expanded to 3 locations across Phoenix because our marketing campaigns had connected her with exactly the clients who needed her specialized approach to wellness. Every success story represented a small business owner who was building something meaningful and sustainable with our help. We weren't just marketing consultants. We were partners in their dreams and aspirations. As Christmas approached, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me from tears on Grandma Rose's porch to partnership with one of the world's most respected technology companies. The external transformation was obvious, but the internal changes were more profound and more important. I had learned to trust my own judgment about what constituted meaningful work, to value impact over approval, and to find satisfaction in building something authentic rather than something that looked impressive to others. Most importantly, I had discovered that the confidence to pursue your vision doesn't come from external validation. It comes from the daily practice of choosing your own path despite uncertainty and resistance. Christmas dinner 2019 felt like a celebration rather than an ordeal. When Aunt Linda asked about my business, I was able to share our Microsoft partnership and the growth we'd achieved without feeling defensive or needy for approval. Her response was everything I'd once dreamed of: genuine, impressed recognition of what we'd accomplished. But the moment that meant the most came when Dad pulled me aside after dinner to say something I'd never heard from him before. "Sarah, I owe you an apology. I was wrong about your business, and I was wrong about what success could look like for you. Watching what you've built has taught me something about courage and conviction that I needed to learn." His words were meaningful, but they weren't life-changing in the way I'd once imagined they would be. The validation felt wonderful, but it wasn't necessary for my sense of accomplishment or my confidence in future decisions. Years of building internal confidence had created a foundation that didn't require external reinforcement to remain stable. The real victory wasn't proving them wrong. It was learning to be right, regardless of their opinion. Looking back now, I can see that the Christmas dinner confrontation that had felt so devastating was actually the catalyst for everything that followed. Aunt Linda's brutal question had forced me to confront the gap between my vision and my reality, between my potential and my current situation. Without that moment of reckoning, I might have continued building my business tentatively, always hedging my bets and holding back the full force of my commitment. But the deeper lesson was about the nature of transformation itself. Real change doesn't happen through a single dramatic moment of breakthrough. It happens through the daily choice to keep moving forward despite uncertainty, criticism, and setbacks. Every client meeting, every rejected proposal, every late night spent, developing strategies had contributed to the expertise and resilience that made our Microsoft partnership possible. The person sitting at that Christmas dinner table in 2019 was fundamentally different from the one who had fled in tears 12 months earlier. I had learned to validate my own work, to measure success by my own standards, and to pursue my vision with complete commitment regardless of external approval. If you've ever sat at a table where your dreams were dismissed as unrealistic, where your potential was measured against someone else's definition of success, I want you to hear this. Their limitations are not your limitations. Their fear of your failure says more about their own unfulfilled dreams than it does about your capabilities. The world needs people who are brave enough to pursue their authentic vision, who choose uncertainty over safety, who build something meaningful rather than settle for something secure. You don't need permission to chase what excites you. You don't need approval to create something beautiful. You just need the courage to keep going when everyone else thinks you should quit. Your moment of vindication is coming, but it won't happen the way you expect. It won't be about proving others wrong. It will be about proving yourself right. It won't be about earning their respect. It will be about respecting yourself enough to pursue your vision regardless of their opinion. So that's my story. From family disappointment to Microsoft partner, from questioned dreamer to successful entrepreneur, all in the span of 1 year that taught me everything about courage, persistence, and the power of betting on yourself when nobody else will. If this resonates with you, if you're fighting for a dream that others can't see, remember this: they're not the ones who have to live your life. You are. Choose the path that excites you, even if it scares everyone else. Your future self will thank you for the courage you showed today. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.